Oh, hi everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this Saturday morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. This is our annual webinar series on the ERAS process. This year, ERAS 2026. This event is hosted by ANPA Education Committee as well as Thy Gifted Neighbor, which is a nonprofit dedicated to helping people interested in STEM and medicine. And I am your host, Dr. Adebola Giwa. And we'll get into a little bit more about my background as well as AMPA a little bit later in the presentation. But before we get started, just giving you guys a heads up of what today's meeting and webinar will be about. We're going to be going over high-level ERAS. We're going to start off with a little disclaimer about how you should be sure to take advice from people. And then as we dive into ERAS, we're going to go over a lot of different things to help all of you out there. We know that the ERAS is something that's can be a very stressful thing for many people. And depending on where you are in your journey right now, some of you have had a lot of guidance, some of you have had little. So just to help put everybody on the same playing field, we want to give everybody both the high level and the low level. So we're going to start with the basics, and then we're going to go over the basics of what's actually included in the ERAS application and how you can competitively and strategically address the different sections. And then for the things that you do put in there, what are the different characteristics that you should highlight and that programs are specifically looking for? And then once you get into that, are the different ways you can highlight your strengths? Why are these things important? What are the qualifications and qualities of a competitive applicant? And when we say competitive applicant, we basically mean somebody who, if they check all these boxes, they should at least have a couple of interviews and should at least match and go over things that you should be sure to do so you make sure that you fall into that category. And then we're also going to go over tips for interview days. A little disclaimer, as I was saying, this is something that I tell all of my mentees. I've been doing this for quite a long time. And this is something I tell my mentees as well as my friends and family. It's always important to take people's advice with a grain of salt. And when you think about getting advice from somebody, there are two things that you should be sure to suss out. Those are their motive, and the other one is their expertise. In regards to motive, you want to make sure that also these two things are not mutually exclusive. So you want to make sure these people have both of them. So just for example, expertise and motive. You could have somebody who has really good motives for you, but they don't have the expertise. So you could have like a close friend or family member who's giving you advice about what to put in your personal statement. But if they don't have the expertise in regards to what should actually be included in there, they may actually give you bad advice and say, hey, you know what? There's too much medical jargon here. You don't want to talk about medicine. I'm sure they see enough of it. Just focus on who you are. And you want to, of course, include medical things in your personal statement. And the other way around, you could have somebody who seems like they have the expertise, but you're unsure of their motive. For those of you who are especially trained in the US, and even if you didn't train in the US, this term, or at least the concept, should be familiar to you, the term gunner. So those people who try way too hard to get ahead, even if that means making sure that you fail. So, those people do anything from try to psych you out during a test all the way to try and hiding your textbook. So as an example of that is I had a mentee who actually was asking me questions about letters of recommendation and should they submit a letter of recommendation from somebody from a different specialty if they're applying for another specialty. And I said, of course, that's fine. ERAS doesn't stop you from doing that. It's fine to have a couple of those as long as you have somebody from the actual specialty that you're applying to writing you a letter. And I asked where they got that idea from, and they said one of their colleagues said, "Yeah, don't do that. It's not a good move." So that's not a good idea because then my mentee would have been one letter short with a less competitive applicant when it comes to the application, and would have been less competitive. And then the other thing is whether the person, even if the person, so you want to make sure that the person has both the right motive and the right expertise. So generally, that's somebody who's at least a couple of years ahead of you, so they're not competition, and somebody who's familiar with the medical education system, a resident and attending, preferably somebody who works at an academic institution. And then even if you have all of that, you need to also remember that when you are applying it, you want to be yourself. And there's different strokes for different folks. Me personally, I'm a pediatric endocrinologist and I've sat on a number of selection committees, but my personal experience may be different from yours. So I'm going to give you the best advice that I can based off of my experience and what I've seen. But, if you come from a different background or, you really want to emphasize this part of your experience, or it may be different depending on if you are applying to a very different specialty. Just remember that everything that I'm saying to apply your own self and your experience to. These are more guidelines as opposed to rules. So we were just talking about motives and expertise. So a good question you should ask after that. Well, what about you, Dr. Giwa? We don't know much about you. Do you have the motive and the expertise? So a little bit about myself. I'm Dr. Adebola Giwa. I'm Nigerian, first generation, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. I went to undergrad at the University of Notre Dame. I did my medical school at the University of Pittsburgh, and then I did my pediatric endocrinology fellowship at Johns Hopkins, where I'm still faculty and staff. And I wear a couple of different hats. So I'm actually kind of bi-coastal. So Hopkins is in Maryland, where I'm faculty, but I actually live in California, where I'm the senior medical director for international clinical trials on rare and endocrine diseases. So that's my background. But in addition to that, I have been involved in recruiting for a very long time, as you can see from the slide at Notre Dame. I've been an admissions host and diversity recruiter. Similarly, in my medical school, I did that. In addition, I was also an incoming medical student interviewer, so I know a lot about what people are looking for when they're coming in and assessing applicants. And then in residency, again, a diversity recruiter and an admissions host. And then I was actually on the intern selection committee. So even in addition to just interviewing a couple of people one off, I was in those back rooms where people made those decisions of who's going to stay and why. And I, for several years, helped make my institution's rank list. So I know a lot of the questions that they ask, and I know how they look at things. I did similar things in fellowship as well as in my current job in regards to recruitment. And then in regards to mentorship, this webinar we've been doing I've been doing with ANPA for about a decade or so. And each year I usually take on around a dozen or so mentees, both US and international, and I help walk them through the process. So I'm very familiar with both what a program is looking for and then the struggles and ups and downs that you may be going through. So this came out with ERAS and NRMP. This is a 2023 main residency match. So as you can see, depending on people's backgrounds, there's certain trends of how well they match. So if you are a US MD or DO senior, your match rate is usually somewhere between 93 to 98%. So most of those people match. However, if you're a couple of years out, if you may be trained in another country, the competitiveness is different and it's a bit harder, with the match rate being somewhere between 47, 50, up to 75% matching. And that's one of the main reasons why we're having this session. As I said, we want to make sure everybody gets put everybody on the same playing field. So some may ask, why is there such a big discrepancy? And having been on both sides of these, my 2 cents is that it goes a lot to do with mentorship and advice. So the seniors, they're fresh in medical school. They have their deans over there guiding them through the whole process. While people who may have trained elsewhere and been a few years out, they don't have that same mentorship going through. The other reason why, putting on my program director hat is one of the ideal candidates would be somebody who is familiar with the current system that they'll be working in, and they have very fresh clinical experience. So depending on how many years out you are, there may be concerns or red flags like, oh, this person's been out for a while. How much clinical experience have they had during this gap? And are they familiar with the US culture and the system? But all those things can be addressed if you do it and do it well in the application. And that's what we're going to go over today. First, the nuts and bolts, ERAS. What's on the paper? We want to make sure you guys look good on paper and in person. So what's on the actual paper? The ERAS contains a number of different stuff. Some things are easier to fill than others. General information, what's your address, foreign address, you could put that in it. Current address, sometimes they may mail you things. Not that many people do snail mail nowadays, but it's put that down. If you only have a foreign address, you can also use a current address of a friend in the US just so they can take dual paper mail for you. They ask about your education. There's a section for experience, publications, hobbies, and interests. Some programs have a supplemental ERAS where they ask you different questions outside of what's actually in there. There's also a personal statement. And then here's just kind of a picture of what the check boxes that you'll need to click as you're filling out the application. So in addition to what I said, there's also letters of recommendation, your MSPE or Dean's letter, your transcript, your ECFMG status report, and nice photograph. So some of the things I want to point out here is physicians in general tend to be more type A. Certain specialties attract different types of people, but especially when it comes to medicine, people are very detail orientated. I've reviewed in my time both as a mentor as well as somebody on the selection committee, widely varying degrees of quality of application. And it's important that you realize some people may say, well, I don't think this is that important. What's most important is my grade. And then they'll take me because of that. And I'm here to tell you that is not the case. Physicians tend to be perfectionists, and while it's almost impossible to be perfect, if you strive for perfection, you'll at least shoot for the stars. So if you miss, you at least land on the clouds. So vice versa, that's the equivalent. Shoot for perfection so that you at least become excellent. And excellence is the expectation and not the exception. So as much as possible, this may be a little may cause you to sweat a little bit, but you need to try as much as possible to make this as flawless as possible. And how I want you to think about it is in this way. So when you are a physician, those of you, many of you have been physicians, many of you are in medical school, when you type out notes, there's lots of jargon, there's lots of typos, there's lots of abbreviations. People don't pay much attention to that to a certain extent, as long as it's relatively understandable. And that's going to be a big part of how the rest of your training is going to be like. So with that being said, when you do your experiences, when you do your personal statement, this will probably be one of the last more important types of creative writing that you do outside of maybe if you do research and things like that. This application is going to determine what residency you get into, and that residency is going to play a big factor in determining what fellowship, if you decide to go into, what job you're going to get afterwards. And in that way, arguably be what kind of determines what you do until you retire in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So with that being said, this application may be the most important application of your life, not to put too much pressure on you. So with that being said, if I'm put on my program director's hat, I'm thinking for you, this selfishly is one of the most important applications you will ever fill out. If you do not take the time to spell check, make sure the grammar is right, make sure it's organized appropriately. If you don't take the time to make sure you check off these boxes, spell check, grammar, organization, if you don't take the time to do that for yourself, which will determine your next 20 to 40 years of your life, if you don't do that for yourself, what are you going to do for a stranger who is your patient? If you don't take that much care in yourself, you are even more likely to even be more sloppy and pay less attention to detail than somebody who has no stake in your life. So with that being said, sloppy grammar and organization is a quick way to get screened out. So the other thing I want you to also imagine, putting on your program director hat. say it's the end of September and now you have 500 applications come through. And when you're on the selection committee, there's certain numbers that stick in your head that you have to wade through. So if you're a program, let's say, and you have 15 seats for how many interns you're going to take in. If you have 15 seats, we'll say hypothetically, you need to interview 100 people. Of those 100 people, 75 or so will accept your interview. And of those 75, you need to rank at least 50 so that you can match and have those 15 seats filled. So with that being said, you need to offer 100 or so interviews to have your seats filled. And now you have 500 applications come through. And it's not an easy process because you only have a few months to do this. With that being said, if you need to pick 100 out of 500, you are going to start off by looking for reasons to screen people out. So don't fill this application like, it doesn't matter. I think they'll give me the benefit of the doubt. This is not a job that you are applying for, and hey, it doesn't matter if you get the job or they're not looking that hard. They will start by looking for reasons to screen you out. One spelling error, one grammar check. Okay, we understand. That's the difference between perfection and excellence. But if we start seeing a trend, multiple spelling errors, multiple grammar issues, that's going to be a pattern, not just one off. That's going to be a pattern, and that's what the pattern is going to say about you. And it's going to say that you don't care and that you don't have appropriate attention to detail. So it's important that you go through it very, very carefully. When I went through my personal statement for both medical school and residency, I went through it probably at least 2 dozen times, and each time making sure all the words are perfect, making sure my mind was clear. I spent some time on it, then checked again the next day so that my eyes were fresh. And each time I'm like, oh, you know what? This could be a little bit more concise. The organization could be a little bit better. Here's a better word for this. So make sure you spend the time, make sure you put in the effort to make sure this is as perfect as possible so that you will have an excellent application. Another way to do this, even if you think the spelling and grammar is appropriate, ideally you want to have this read by native US speaker if you're not already like an English major or you're already very confident in your writing capabilities. I say native US because you also want to be careful not to put in non-domestic colloquialism. I've seen applications that say, oh, I had this issue with my mom, or maybe you spell color with like an extra U or something like that. That's not going to disqualify you, but you want to try and avoid that. So you want to have somebody with native US eyes look at it. So, you know, that's one thing. And then someone who's also medical, because if you have somebody who's an English major read it, it'll be great for picking up the grammar things. But to make sure it's also medically appropriate, you'll want to also try to have somebody who is in the medical system, has gone through residency, and knows what residency programs look at, either because they were on the selection committee or an interviewer, or because they submitted something and got in. What does the actual process look like? We're already halfway through, so I won't go too much into getting tokens, which hopefully all of you guys have. But basically, the timeline is the last year's match season ended at the end of May. So then the new ERAS season began in the beginning of June. June 25th, the ECFMG people were distributed tokens so they can get their tokens and then register to get access to the ERAS application. So basically, since June, potential applicants were able to put in their information for the ERAS system over the summer. June 3rd, you can start submitting your actual application. And then September 24th, that is when programs can actually start reviewing it. And then interview season starts after this, basically. Most people will start sending out interviews early, mid-October, and then most invites will be given around November. Interview season generally ends at the end of January, beginning of February. In February, you can submit your rank list, and then match week, when you find out where you match, that will happen in mid-March. And I won't go into too much of the details of how match week works. We'll have another webinar about that as we get closer to that. So some of the things I want to point out to you guys, this is actually a nice thing, September 3rd and September 24th. And there was a refresh of the ERAS system in, I think, 2021, 2022, because before that, and back in my day, how ERAS used to work is these used to actually be the same day. So, or like one day after another. And because of that, the system would pretty much always crash. Everybody, all the medical students would all submit it on September 23rd, and the system would crash because of all that bandwidth. And then all the programs trying to open it on September 24th or so would also cause the system crash. So with this, there's a lot more space. So you can submit September 23rd, September 3rd, and programs can start looking at it at September 24th. So one of the things I want to point out here, and this is very important, is a question that a lot of people have asked it, is what is the importance of September 24th? And what is the importance of when you actually submit? It doesn't matter if you submit September 3rd or September 23rd. You're all going to be in the same playing field. They're not going to see that somebody submitted this day versus that day. So what's going to happen? So now we're going to put on our program director hat. And it's September 24th and it's 9 a.m. and I'm a program director. I have to see patients. I have to train residents. I have to do administrative stuff. So now it's 5 p.m. I go home. I get home at 6. I'm eating. I'm like, okay. I open up ERAS and I have 150 applications. I'm like, whoa. So I'm probably only going to look through 10 or 15 that night. I'm not going to go through all 150, mark off who did it on this time, and then everybody who's after that, they don't have a chance. So the main point of what I'm saying is that for about at least a week to 2 weeks, you're all kind of in the same playing field in regards to competitiveness in terms of getting your application in on time. So if you submit from September 24th to 2 weeks after, you're about in the same playing field. I would try and keep it to under a week so that you are very much within the same playing field. It's kind of like deviation from the mean and standard deviation. So each week is kind of a standard deviation away, but you want to, as much as possible, be within that first week. And this mostly is just optic. So you want to look like you are prepared. And just as an example of that, when I was applying to fellowship, I had some issues getting a letter of recommendation from my dean, and she asked me to write the letter of recommendation, and she would, modify it. She wanted me to start with the draft, but I was, doing night shifts, and I've never wrote a letter of recommendation before, so it took me a while to get it into her. So by the time I actually submitted my application for Ped Endocrine Fellowship, I did get my interviews, but probably in around 50-60% of my interviews, they actually asked me why it was that I turned it in so late. Luckily, because of other parts of my application, I was still really competitive. I did a lot of endocrine research and I had good letters and all that good stuff. So I got the interviews. But one program actually told me, I told them what happened. I was like, oh, it took a while for my dean to get her letter in, and that's why it took me a while. So he actually said to me, he's like, oh, okay, I was worried that maybe this was a last resort and maybe you decided to do this last minute. So that's what it potentially shows to a residency program if you don't have your things in time, that you were not prepared. So it's ideal to do that. So takeaway, try to get it in within 1 week. The other caveat to this is it's better to submit as much as possible a complete application as opposed to an incomplete application. If you're trying to just submit September 24th, maybe you didn't have a personal statement ready. You're having somebody review it and they're still getting it to you. But wait for that personal statement before you submit things. Because what happens is put on your program director hat. They're going to get an application. They're going to see that it's incomplete. Program directors have the ability to screen certain things in the application. They can screen grades. They can screen for completeness. This person's missing this many letters of recommendation. This person is missing their transcript. This person did not take their step exam. A lot, and of course, every place is different. But what I'll tell you is that a lot of places, they'll screen for incompleteness because think about this. If somebody applies, they have not taken step two, which is required to match. If they then offer them a interview, they come and they interview, and then it turns out that they don't pass step two, okay, or they don't take it at all, then they can't match, they can't put that person on their rank list. And that means they offered an interview to somebody who can't take the spot, which means they lost a potential spot for somebody who's really competitive. So then they just wasted their time. So a lot of them will go in with that mindset. And if your application is not complete, they will screen it out and they won't look at it. When you complete it later, they'll get a notification that Emeka has now completed their application. And then they can go back and look at your complete application and do the rest. And of course, I can't speak for all programs, but you don't want to have to depend on that because they may see it and they may not go back and look at it, even though they got a notification that it's not complete. It's much better that they get, okay, October 5th, Amy now has submitted a whole new complete application. They're more likely to look at that as opposed to, oh, this person now just submitted it later. So that being said, the key takeaway, try to submit within the first week or two, first week ideally, and as much as you can, try to make sure that your application is complete. So the other important thing, takeaway, and everybody journey is different. So take this just as a thought. This is not what I'm telling you to do. So especially if you need to take exams, if you have like step two scheduled for late November or December, think about the math for that. If you have to take it then, you may not get your grade until late December. If you are now have a complete application at late December, that's when programs will start looking at you. And that's almost already at the end of interview season. And there may not be as many spots left. So depending on how competitive you are, you need to think about, do you want to apply for this cycle versus the next cycle? Because if you apply this cycle and you don't get through, that'll do stuff to your confidence and all that craziness. Versus, hey, let me just take my time instead of rushing and trying to take this exam in December so I can apply. Let me take my time. Maybe I can take the exam even a little bit later on and then apply more competitively next cycle. That's, of course, a case by case basis. So they didn't have this back when I took the ERAS. It used to be outlawed, actually. You weren't really supposed to tell programs. You really couldn't communicate preferences, geographical setting, hometown. You had to actually take up space in your personal statement to hint at this. Now they've just like, let's just put it all out there. So now what you can do now, you can put in biographical information and select preferences. So geographical preferences, you could select up to 3 regions. You can have a lack thereof. So you can say you have no preference, and then you can put a description of your preference. So here is an example. Well, are the regions. So, New England, South Atlantic, Mountain, all the way down to Pacific. Similarly, you can put a setting preference. Maybe you did a lot of rural medicine. Maybe you came from a rural background. So rural, suburban, urban, no preference, and a description of why. And then hometown, it's different for depending if you're applying to ERAS or CAS. And CAS, I say CAS, not all specialties use ERAS. There's some specialties that do not, that include urology, OB-GYN, emergency medicine, and a few others. They kind of have different things, but you could basically, if home institution and hometown, so you can list up to 5 of where you currently or previously live or have strong ties or belonging to. Similarly, you can put down program signals. Each specialty is a little bit different. That allows you to put down either a certain number of signals, which basically says, hey, I'm looking at you. It's basically a wink. And then certain specialties also change not just numbers, but also change the color. So you can give somebody a gold signal versus a silver signal. So you'll have to look into that. So some of you may say, well, does any of this stuff even make a difference? Am I just clicking? Is it random or does this actually make a difference? And the answer is yes. So the reason behind that, I'm going to put on my program director hat, is remember the numbers that I gave you before, that a program will get 500 applications, they'll send out 100 invites, 75 people will accept the invites, et cetera, et cetera. So for those numbers to work and to make sure you fill 15 seats, you don't necessarily just want to give invitations to people that are just very smart and very competitive, because programs also know where they are in the totem pole of how competitive they are. So if they, for example, offer interviews to everybody that's, I'm just going to make up a well-known program, a whole bunch of people that all want to go to Hopkins or Harvard, or they end up going there because they have really great grades and things like that. If they give interviews to people who don't, who are not likely to actually go to their program, they're more likely to have unfilled spots. So with that being said, what's most important for a program to have in this cycle are two things. One, qualified residents that'll complete the program successfully. And then number two, people that'll actually come. So how will they know if people are actually more likely to come to their program? You tell them. So you signal. It's like, hey, I have reason to be here. I want to go to this program because my family lives down the street. I really love rural medicine because of this and that reason. So as you can see here, you guys can read this over your reading as I was talking, but 88% use these signals as a screening tool before a more thorough application review. 86% use it as a tiebreaker to help to decide whom to interview. They also use this as a topic of discussion when they actually interview the people. 75% agree that the program signals help them identify applicants they would have otherwise overlooked. So what does that mean for you? Definitely use your signals. Okay. Next, how do you use your signals? You want to make sure that you strategic, and I'll give you something else to read. So here's also the information about the geographic preferences, which are very similar to the program signals. So you want to make sure you use these things strategically. So usually when you make your list of programs that you want to apply to, you can break them off into three categories. One are your reach, one is your level, and one are your safeties. Reach is like, yeah, if I can really, if all the stars align, I'll get here. And safety is just like, yeah, I really shouldn't have a problem getting into this place. So depending on how competitive you are, you want to use them strategically. If you are maybe very competitive, you want to use probably, and you are sure that you shouldn't have any issues getting into your reach, getting into your level or your safety programs, you want to use most of your signals and geographic preferences to attract programs that are in your reach area. While maybe if you are less competitive and you have a lot of red flags, you want to try and use your preferences and signals a little bit more in places that are in your safety to make sure that you match in a place, and then maybe use less so for your reach programs. And this basically says both applicants and programs found this very helpful. The key takeaway I want you to see also is that in most specialties, both geographic preferences and alignment resulted in a higher probability of interview invitations. So where you signal, you're more likely to get an interview there. One thing I want to touch on too, no preference also is helpful. If you don't have a preference, that's completely fine. The other thing I also want to point out too is programs do not see where you did signal. So if you signaled a bunch of other programs and they didn't get one, they're not going to know who you signaled. The same thing with geographic preferences as well. If you have a geographic preference for South Atlantic and you're applying to Stanford, they are not going to know that you have a preference for South Atlantic. They're just going to see that there's not a preference in their area. Me, I did not have any preferences when I applied, and that did come up as a question. This wasn't that wasn't an option when I applied. But when I went on interviews, I was single, no kids, and I was completely fine moving to different places. So I spent most of my life, as you guys saw from my CV, in the Northeast and Midwest. And, I applied to places in California, and they asked me straight up on the interview, hey, why are you applying to California? You have family here? Have you ever been here before? You got any ties? And I was like, nope, nope, nope. This is my first time in California. But I honestly, it doesn't matter for me. And how I phrased it was, I am a person who establishes rapport really well. I'm the kind of person that you can pick up, put anywhere, and I'll make friends and ties easily. And I said, that's what I did my whole life. I went where I went to college, medical school, residency. I didn't know anybody there, and I thrived. And I have no issue thriving in this place too. And I love the sun. So it's not an issue. So if you do not have a preference, make sure you have a story behind it in case you are asked. That question may come up regardless of what your preference is. So make sure you have an answer of why you want to be there. And if your answer is also, I don't have a preference, that's an okay answer too. But then just make it a good one. You don't want to sound like, man, I'll take wherever you give me, man. I just want to be a doctor. Just come up with a good answer. Here's a big part of where the points come from in the ERAS application, past experiences. So you can select up to 10 experiences that communicate who you are, what you're passionate about, and what is most important. Here is a little bit of an excerpt of what are the things they're going to ask you about in the experience section. You put down the name of the organization, what experience type, which we have outlined over here. So it's a wide range of what you can choose from work to teaching to even hobbies. What was your title, start and end date, the location, how frequently you participated in, and then also the primary focus of what you were doing there, and then the key characteristic. You also put down the context, roles, and responsibilities so that they understand where this fits in to your story. It gives you more context. And then also you also have the opportunity for 3 of the 10 experiences. You can put down a meaningful experience. You can explain a little bit more of why this experience was particularly meaningful to you and how it influenced you. And the next thing about that is the impactful experiences. Not everybody has to fill this out. It's mostly used for you to describe any challenges or hardships, and they can be family, financial, life circumstances, those kinds of things. So these things are really important. This is the place where you need to address your red flags. And I think one of the best ways to explain why this is here, because this is part of the refresh, is to let you know what it was before that. Before that, when you put in your experiences, all you basically put was like the organization and the title, the location, the date. There was no option for primary focus. There was no option for key characteristic. There was no most meaningful. So if you had a bunch of experiences and they were very impactful for you, we'll say 5 were very meaningful for you, you had to find a way to put all that in your personal statement. And then if you had red flags, maybe you had a gap year, maybe you failed a test, you also had to put that in your personal statement. And then also try and keep your personal statement under a page, which was really hard. So this is a way to be strategic. What are the strategies you should be aware of? We'll start with the easy ones. Impactful experience. If you have a red flag, you need to address it. If you failed a test, if you have a gap year, if you had to retake the step exam, you need to address it. That's a question I get pretty frequently. Hey, should I say anything? I should just kind of hope they don't notice. I don't want to draw attention to it. You want to address it. You're not drawing attention to it. They want to address it. And I'll tell you, this is what happens in the back rooms. They say, hey, this applicant, their application looks great. However, they didn't pass USMLE the first time, but they got a pretty good score the second time. Does anybody know why? Nobody knows why. So with that, they are going to assume that you just were not smart enough or you didn't study enough the first time, and then you did better the second time out of maybe luck or maybe like, oh, you realize it was a serious thing. The issue with that is if you failed a step exam, there's a higher risk that you'll fail a future standardized exam. So if you failed step one because they think you weren't smart enough, then there's a high chance that you will fail step three. If you don't pass step three, you can't pass residency. If you don't pass residency, they wasted a spot and it ruins their stats. So if there's no explanation, they don't think you're smart enough to pass step one the first time, they're less likely to rank you highly. However, if maybe there was extenuating circumstances, like maybe you will say a family member passed away or you're new to the country or some other reason, like, oh, well, that makes sense. They were a new mother, they had a new child, and then you can put it in the proper context. You don't address it, they will assume the worst, so you need to address it. Impactful experience is not where you put down, hey, one time I volunteered at a soup kitchen and I saw people who are less fortunate, and I said, these are the kind of people I want to help, and that's why I got into medicine. No, that's something you can put if you do not have any red flags. If you have red flags, you need to address it there. Additionally, the other reasons why they have this as well is say you have 15 or 13 experiences. You only have room to put in 10. So what you can do with the other three, you can put it in your personal statement. And you don't have to worry about, say you have 13 and five of them are very meaningful, but you can only talk about three of them in this application. So now you could take the other two that didn't have space for a meaningful experience and put that in your personal statement. That way, your personal statement does not need to be very long. So, what that means for you, key takeaways, try and fill this as much as possible. Meaningful experience, put in here what you can, and then you can put the rest in your personal statement. If you have red flags, you need to address red flags. The other thing I want to share with you guys is how do you even fill out the experience section? And, I do a lot of mentorship with people who are applying, and I actually developed my own worksheet to help them through because honestly, there is not a lot of direction on what you're actually supposed to put there on the application. So I actually made a worksheet where I put in the tip for completing the experiences section. And I highlighted some parts. I won't read through all of them. But some of the things I want you to take away is the goal of this is not to just list what you've done, but to reflect on how your experiences shape your path in medicine, the values you developed, and the unique perspective you bring. Focus on impact, both what you contributed and how the experiences influenced you. Avoid repeating the same things across all entries, show your range. Save meaningful designations for experiences that shaped your personal and professional growth. You want to, again, show who you are, what you're passionate about, what is most important to you. The things I want you to take away from this is you want to be able to show your range, and we'll get more into it a little bit later, like what are the things you want to hit on, but you don't want to necessarily look like a one-trick pony, as they say. So I've seen applications and some people, they just want to fill the whole thing with every clinical experience and try. We'll say there's an applicant who is an IMG, since most of you guys are IMGs, and they've been in the US for 3 years and they've been doing externships, you know, several of them. Maybe they have like 8 externships. So then maybe even 10, and then they just do the whole experience section, just every externship. But they don't put community service in there. They don't put the research that they did. It's just like, this is a job to be a doctor. Let me put in all the doctor things that I have. But we'll go over later what are the things you want to hit on. But you want to show your range because they don't only want clinicians, they want potential researchers. They want people who show that they contribute to the community, have that empathy, have that altruism. You want to show your range. So this is your opportunity to do it. You, of course, need to put down your responsibilities and what you did, but you also want to show how you grew from it. That is the key. They know you have clinical skills. So if you every experience just says, I did physical exams and I did a history and I helped develop the plan. It's like, okay, we get it. You can do that. But they want to see how you grow. They want to like, oh, maybe you in this experience where instead of just putting, oh, I did physical exams and then I came up with a plan, you can also say, oh, this was in an emergency room and I learned how to be calm under pressure. I worked in a place with low resources and I learned ingenuity. And the importance of that can be seen. So this is another part that I've also developed for my mentees. They actually point to that primary focus area. Key characteristics developed. They literally have it there. They say, we want you to tell us how you grew in these areas: communication, critical thinking, empathy, ethical responsibility, ingenuity, reliability, dependability, resilience, teamwork, leadership. These are the qualities that they want to see. You don't have to hit everyone. Remember, you're painting a picture of who you are. So if you really want to emphasize that your strengths are teamwork and resilience, then make sure you hit those and hit the other ones. You don't have to get all of them, but make sure you show your range. And then even here for my mentees, I have: what was the main focus of your goal? Use the area that aligns most, but what you contributed to or learned about. Because you may say, well, I did a bunch of these things, you know, but think about what you did the most, what you took most from it. So when you're filling this out, one thing I want you to remember, and I'm going to say this for the different groups of people, but I'm going to focus on group 3 and 4 particularly. These people, they don't know you. They're not your friends. They're not your family. They don't know your background. Assume they are people, these people live in a bubble inside their own medical hospital and they don't know how the rest of the world works. I say this because, I work with a lot of mentees and I go through a lot of these applications. And a lot of times people will just put medical officer, for like 3 or 4 of their experiences. Because I actually worked in Nigeria for a little while as a physician, I understand what that means. However, if I didn't, I wouldn't know what a medical officer is. I don't know about the first year of service. I don't know about any of that. I don't know how the medical system works. I don't know that when you finish medical school in Nigeria, that medical school in Nigeria is actually multiple years. It's not 4 years like most US programs. It actually includes undergrad. You need to give context to these kinds of things. They're not going to understand, oh, I'm a medical officer. They're not going to know that you did 4 different specialties when you're a medical officer. And even if you are a US person, maybe you had time off, they want to understand the context of all of that. So it's not just roles and responsibilities, it's context. What I have here is I made up an example based off of things that I've seen before. This is not based off of any person in particular. This is an example of kind of what are things not to do. I won't read all of this out. I'll let you guys read it. I'll give you a minute. So I'm going to point out the things not to do. One, make sure you actually do this. A lot of my mentees actually in the past skipped this section and didn't even put in a primary focus and key characteristic. Don't do that. It's an easy way to get screened out. They'll be like, this person doesn't know how to follow directions. They rushed through this thing and didn't even notice there's a whole section that they didn't do. If they can't do that for this important application, what are they going to do in real life? Next, compulsory 1 year service. Compulsory, you don't want to make it sound like the work that you did, you only did it because you were forced to do it. I learned. So this is something, this may be more acceptable in the UK. I learned, but no, don't use colloquialisms in your presentation. I coordinated lots of health outreaches. Again, colloquialisms you don't want to use. Meaningful experience. Like, hey, this kind of says to me, I got to do stuff by myself, and people said nice things about me, and it made me feel good. I don't know what that has to do with professionalism. I organize health outreaches, organize recognition whilst preparing for USMLEs. I bounce and I bounce. You don't need to talk about your ability to balance it over here. You can save that for your impactful experience. Here, I did that same one in 3 different ways. What I want to point out in this one are the different formats you can do it in. So there are a couple of ways you can do it. And when you fill out the experience section, you can do italics, bold, you can do bullets. So use those strategically. So I want you to think about also, read this as I'm talking to you because I don't want to have to read all this stuff to you. So you're putting on your program director hat, and now you come home and you got 200 applications to look at, and you're like, okay, let me do 15. You want to make this easy for them to do. The other thing they're looking at is organization. So this is a little thing that you may not realize. You may think, oh, let me just get this information down. It doesn't matter how it's organized. It does matter. They're hiring somebody to take care of other people and take care of their lives. And part of that also is communicating with other people on the medical team. So when you sign out to somebody, you need to be able to organize your thoughts appropriately. And because they're choosing people who have such an important job that holds a big part of the institution's reputation, they need to pull as much as they can from the little that you give them. So make sure you organize things properly. If you don't organize things properly, they will say this person is not organized. They will not make a good resident. So I say that because it's a good idea to try and keep your experiences in the same format. So I'll show you like different ways you can do this. And each way is fine. Just figure out what works for you. You can put the whole experience into a block of text. As long as you are clear with what you want to say. So here's another version of that. I completed 1 year of medical service. You see, I took out compulsory at a health center, didn't spell center with an RE, serving thousands where I independently managed a wide range of conditions across blah, blah, blah. And that's this is one way you can do it. The other way is you can just bullet all of your responsibilities. Another way that you can do it is context and then bullet the responsibilities. The thing about that one is it's good because remember what I was saying about context. I served as a medical officer, which is the equivalent to a medical intern or a residency intern. So now they have the context because they don't know that otherwise. And that's why they say, give us the context. Managing a primary healthcare center for thousands of blah 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 blah, where I independently managed a wide range of conditions, while there, bullet what you did. Because what I've seen also in the past is people have this bulletin and say, I served blah, blah, blah. I provided blah, blah, blah. I developed blah, blah, blah. And then you're wasting characters. You only have 750 characters. So if you do this, you could say, while there, I, or my responsibilities included, colon, and then put that there like that. I mean, you choose what works well with you. Just make sure you do it properly. I like 3 because it puts it in context, and I like the bullets because it's easier to read because a lot of people are going to be skimming and it's easy for them to not miss anything if you put it bulleted like this. I don't necessarily always go with straight bullets because it's hard to put the context and responsibilities all kind of aligning. When you do this too, try to make sure you're consistent. So don't try not to have half of the experiences in paragraphs and the other half like this, and then another, maybe not half, maybe another third, and then the other remaining like that. And make sure if you're doing the bullets, if you're just going to use a dash, make sure you put the proper amount of space consistent. I've seen people where they'll just have, here and they just have that. And then here they'll have this and then space. Now to you, depending on how type A you are, you're like, well, the information's there. That's just a little thing. You're just nitpicky. Yeah. Yeah, that's correct. I am just nitpicky. But again, remember, 500 applications and I need to get rid of 400. This shows that you're not consistent. This shows that you probably did it because you weren't paying attention, not attention to detail. And that's how you will get weeded out. So here is the original one that was back there. And remember, I was like, man, look at that. You just talking about how you like people saying nice things about you. Here's another way you can say this. This role profoundly honed my critical thinking and problem solving amidst limited resources. Autonomy and patient care affirmed affirmed by specialist feedback was pivotal for my confidence and proficiency in clinical skills. Orchestrating health outreaches while preparing for medical licensing exams showcased my resilience and dedication. Like, remember, you want to show why this is important to you. Solidifying my commitment to adaptable, proactive medical practice. And remember, these meaningful experiences are supposed to be connected to this and that. That's literally the direction. So if you're going to choose something to be a meaningful experience, make sure it aligns with this. So if that person used that, then they can easily put resilience and adaptability because they talked about how it was in a low resource area. The other thing I want to say to, or especially the people who are IMGs or the people who practice in another country or people who may have practiced abroad for a little bit, use that as a strength. I have a lot of mentees who actually try to avoid talking about their experiences in other countries. But you need to remember what makes you different and what makes you competitive and who your competitors are. Most of your competitors are going to be, yeah, your biggest amount of competitors are going to be MDDO seniors. These people, for the most part, have had a year of clinical experience, just doing rotations in the US, where most places, if you want something done, you just type it into your computer, and there's a magic electronic fairy that goes to the patient, draws their blood, scans their brain, and then poops out the result an hour later. However, if you worked in another country, I'll tell you about my experience when I was in Nigeria. If I wanted to even do a CBC, I would go to the patient. I would draw their blood. I would bring their blood downstairs. I'd put it in a machine and spin the actual blood and use an actual counter to check what the hematocrit and hemoglobin was. Some of you have had to practice under lamplight where there was power outages. Some of you have had to put in most of the lines yourself. Your competitors have not done this. You've had to do this for a long time. You have practiced as a physician for many years, so you've already done the job and a harder version of it. That is one of your biggest strengths. Do not downplay it. Lean into it. As I said, you don't miss free throws. Those are easy points. So if you have experience in other places, especially low resource, emphasize that, highlight that, show your resilience, your adaptability. Those are easy points for you. So don't miss those free throws because you worked hard for that degree. So don't sleep on it. One quick thing I want to say in addition to is, I mentioned that ERAS, that's the ERAS, but there's also CAS. Some other specialties don't use the ERAS system, but it's for the most part the same. Some of the difference, this is what I have for, I think, CAS, I know for OB-GYN and emergency medicine are about the same. So similarly, they ask for background information about the experience. The things that are different for OB-GYN and in EM, for example, are you may have 12 experiences instead of 10. You still can choose three to be most meaningful. And they actually separate it from those that are professional and clinically related to those that are non-medical. For this, they want you to provide three entries. So this goes to show you, again, also one thing I want to tell you is don't sleep on your extracurriculars. Some people are tempted, like, hey, I'm applying for a medical job. Let me only put my medical experiences. No, put in your other stuff too. If you volunteer at your church and you help old ladies get from their house to the church, that shows empathy. If you have to lead that program yourself, that shows leadership skills. So don't sleep on those things. It does not need to be science or medically related. And the further evidence of this is that it literally says that here. We encourage you to prioritize reporting jobs or positions you held for significant period of times, such as jobs or positions you held during high school, college, summers, gap years. These types of jobs could include working as a salesperson in a department store, a wait person in a restaurant, a valet. So you're showing your range. So don't sleep on those things. So here's a rubric of the things that programs look for. And this is a general rubric, every place will have their own kind of thing. But these are the things you want to be sure that you hit on when you and fill your application, as well as the whole process in and of itself. What I tell my mentees for the most part is you control the narrative. The people that do the best on this process are people that understand that. You are not just filling in things that this is not a question and answer kind of multiple choice question. All right, let me just put this in there, put this in there. Hopefully they like it. That's part of it. The other part is you are telling them what they should like and why. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So these are the things that they're looking for. Uh, Leadership, scholarship, service, academic, which is your grade. Scholarship is research, letters of recommendation, interviews, how you do in person, and it's also hidden bonus points. So the thing I just want to highlight over here is that a lot of people think what matters most is your grades, but this, if you add it up, it comes to 10. And this is only 2 points out of 10. It only makes up a fifth of your picture. I bring this up because I trained in Nigeria as well, and one of the issues that I find that IMGs have the most when they're not successful in the match is the US culture is different. And some cultures, what's most important is just your grades and your letters of recommendation. Your grades and who can speak for you, and you do not need to speak for yourself. And that can be good, and that yes, you're very humble. You don't want to brag about all the accolades that you have. But in the US, other people's words don't count as much as your own. So you need to sell yourself. You need to talk about these things. They will not assume it for you. They will not take it from your letters of recommendation, because you even see letters of recommendation even count less than most of these things. They have 2 points. So you need to be able to tell them you're a leader who can do research and cares about people. You need to be able to tell them that yourself. And you can't do that by just putting necessarily all your clinical experiences and not talking about these other things. So what I have here, the things I'm going to highlight is what are considered qualities of somebody who is a competitive applicant. And as I said before, a competitive applicant is basically somebody who should get a couple of interviews and should at least match in one place. So medical school, first couple of years is usually pass fail. So hopefully you passed everything. Your clinical years, hopefully you also passed everything. And high pass or honor a few, particularly one in the intended specialty that you're going into. Board exams, step one, lucky for most of you guys, was just pass fail since January 2022. Step two, CK, hopefully you only took one, and your score is kind of dependent on your specialty and competitiveness. If there's, you don't have to take step three, but I'll get back to this in a little bit. There used to be something called Step 2 CS. There were only like half a dozen sites or so in the US. So everybody, all the medical schools, all the medical students in the country all had to fly to one corner of, of the country to take this exam. But they've since done away with Step 2 CS, and now they just have these special ECFMG certification pathways. This is if you are not a US graduate. I won't go over this for the sake of time, and it's also out of the scope, but you should have probably done this already if you have a token and are planning to apply. The things I want to say here is if you've had multiple failures in step one or step two, it's a good idea to take step three or Comlex USA 3 if you are DO. The reason for that is it goes back to what I said. We put on our program director hat, and statistically, if you had issues passing this the first time, you'll probably have issues passing step three. For you to successfully complete residency, you need to pass step three. So to take away that worry about failed exams, you take step three, then they don't have to worry if you're going to pass step three. You already passed it. So all you have to do is just get through residency, and you don't have to worry about the exams. The other thing I want to say, and this is very important, especially for the older grads, I've helped people who are MD seniors all the way to people who have completed medical school or 2 decades ago. There are certain rules for if you've passed or failed this, if it took you multiple attempts, then also the age of your exams. So especially if you did step one, step two, especially if it's been more than 7 to 10 years, you need to go back and look at the rules for certain places, because every state is different. Because the other thing that programs want to do, besides make sure that their residents get through residency, is they want to make sure they get board certified. For you to be board certified in certain states, your exams have to be of a certain age. You have to, and they have different rules in different languages, i.e., some are say you have to have passed all of them within this certain amount of time. So I won't get into the nuts and bolts of it now, but I'll just say if you've taken your exam more than 7 to 10 years ago, go back and look at the rules, because there's only a handful, half a dozen or so states that will take any step exam regardless of the age. So that already puts you at a really big disadvantage. So you may want to consider retaking the exams to make sure you have a fresh one. Additionally, even if the state says, okay, yeah, we'll take it, even if you took this exam in the 90s, you also have to think, does the program, how was the program going to think when they see that your exams were taken 2, 3 decades ago? Medicine has changed a lot since then. So they're also going to have their own eyebrows raised with old exams. So if you took old exams, check what states accept that, because you don't want to waste applying to states or programs that don't even take your exams. And I've seen people that have applied multiple years not realizing that they weren't getting in, not because of what was on their application, but how old their exams are. So don't waste your time and money. Make sure you apply when you're ready and not apply because you are impatient. Physicians are leaders. When you're in attending, your team includes senior residents, interns, pharmacists, nurses, the guy who sweeps the floor, everybody. So you will be leading the team. The buck stops with you. So how are leaders made? I know they have the term natural born leaders, but that's not really true. Leaders are forged through experience. You're not going to know how to manage a group that has a lot of disagreements if you've never done it before. So they want to see people that have been leaders. So get involved any of these different places. Special interest groups, cultural groups, community service, extracurricular activities. So if you have extracurricular activities that are not medically or science related, that is a way that you can get points for leadership. It also shows your diversity in regards to your skills. As people on the selection committee, we see it all the time, so we know to expect it. So it helps you stand out if you're not in this category. But a lot of times we look at people's applications and we look at the start date for their experiences, and they all started within less than a year of application season. And they understand that medical students are busy and they want to focus on their grades and everything. But then they didn't really think about it until their third year of medical school. Like, oh no, they're gonna ask me about what I do outside class. Oh shoot, I better start doing stuff. So the ideal applicants are the ones that have been doing stuff early on. So anybody who is not applying for match this year and still has time, make sure you get involved in stuff. And it shows a nice progression. It's like, oh, this year you started as a member. The next year you were activity coordinator. Then the next year you're on the board of directors. So you want to be able to talk about it and list it in your application. Scholarship, research is important. Medicine has changed from a couple of decades ago when it used to be, hey, why are you following this clinical practice? Because that's the way I was trained and that's the way we all do it at our institution. That doesn't follow anymore. A lot of people want to have things based off of evidence-based medicine. That's how you make your decisions. Next, again, I'll put on my program director hat, low key. It also affects the prestige of a university because clinical work brings in money from the reimbursement, but what really brings notoriety to an institution, the other big thing are the research. That's what you see up on billboards for different institutions. Hey, over here, we do all this research in cancer. We cure this, and that. So they want to also have potential researchers. That's something that's important. Every program's a little bit different. Remember, I said these are guidelines. If you're applying to a community-based program that doesn't offer any research or that's not important, that's something different. But just generally speaking, it's great to have some sort of research experience. Be anything from being a lab assistant to a first author. There's even a specific section that allows you to put in and list your publications and presentations that you've done. So be able to speak about it, big or small, it's good to put something down. Service commitment. So somewhere in your application, your personal statement, your experiences, you should give off the impression that you like to help people. Hopefully that's one. I mean, it should go without saying, but you do have to say it. So you want to show that you actually enjoy helping people. Why is this important? Because residency is hard. They want to make sure people are getting into this for the right reasons. There's a good number of people out there that attempt medicine, and you probably maybe remember this from undergrad, look to the person to your left and look to the person to your right. One of you won't be here. And some people don't get into medicine for the right reasons. Some people do it for the money and the prestige or familial or social pressures. Those kinds of people, I've had friends who intern year, they're already dreaming about retirement. But if you actually like to help people, when I was a fellow, even though I'd be on call 24/7 for a week straight, and I'd be up all night taking calls about blood sugars and sodium levels, I was still happy to go into the hospital at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. So I enjoy doing what I do because I help people. If you don't like helping people, the work, even if you're smart enough to pass all the grades, the work will eventually burn you out. If you're burnt out, you're not going to treat patients properly. You're not going to be as diligent with your work, and there's going to be issues with accidents, with lawsuits, and people not completing residency. So people don't want those kinds of people in their program. Those people are liabilities. So I'm saying, please be going into medicine because you like to help people, and please let your program know that you like to help people by highlighting the community service. Again, this does not need to necessarily be science related, so you don't all have to be hospital volunteers. It could be anything that you do that's service orientated. So be sure to put that in your application. Letters of recommendation. This was, one point. These are important, and this is just somebody to kind of back up what you're saying. So what I'll say about this that's most important is that your ideal letter is written by somebody who's well known and credible and high ranking, but most importantly, someone who's willing to write a letter and somebody who knows you. It's much, much better to get a letter from somebody who wants to write you a letter because they think highly of you and somebody who actually knows you. And I'll give you just two quick anecdotes to describe this. And these anecdotes will also show you how to ask somebody for a letter of recommendation. When I was a medical student applying for pediatric residency, I did my pediatrics rotation, and we had this person who's very well known in pediatrics. He like literally wrote the textbook that everybody who's a pediatrician has in their library. And this is how you ask somebody for a letter of recommendation. If they are doing a rotation with you in the first week of the rotation, you find time to take them aside and you say, "Hey, I really want to do my best during this rotation. It would be great if I could get some feedback from you just so I can improve my skills." You say that week one or early on if you're with them for a month. And then they'll say, "Okay, yeah, sure." And then he's like, "Okay, I'm going to ask you for feedback in during week three." Week three comes, you take them aside and you say, "Hey, now that you've seen me for a while, I'd love to get your feedback. Do you think we could take some time to set up a feedback session later today or later on this week?" You don't want to ask them for feedback in both of those instances at the moment. That's put people on the spot. And a lot of people don't like to be pressured that way. And you're more likely to get better feedback if you give them time to think about it. So you make sure you do your best during that rotation and that day so they can actually give you positive feedback. Okay. You now have the feedback session. You can say, "They're giving you feedback." Right there and then, after they give you the feedback, you know what they're going to say in your letter of recommendation because they literally just told you. Hopefully, most of the feedback that they gave you will be positive. Some of them will be constructive, and then you'll say, "Oh, thank you. I could improve on that. Thanks for bringing it out," or defend what happened. If they said mostly nice things about you and you get a good vibe, you say, "I'm really happy that you gave me this feedback. I really want to be the best pediatrician possible, and I'm applying for residency this year. Would you feel comfortable writing me a letter of recommendation?" And it's good that you phrase it that way because if you don't want to take somebody who's going to write you a letter of recommendation reluctantly. There's a higher probability that they may not write you a good one and that they may even write you a negative one. So I did that and I went up to him and I did all that. And he was kind of reluctant. He was just like, I don't know if I really saw you enough, you know, even though it was for a week and we rounded a number of times. And I said, "Okay, that's fine. I completely understand. Thanks for your time. No harm, no foul." Another physician I went to was not just a regular pediatrician. They were like, "Dable, I'd love to. That's great. I would, yeah." And then they wrote me a glowing letter of recommendation. And I got into the program of my choice from those letters. So it's much better to have that than somebody who may say something bad about you, because I've been on the other side on the selection committee and I have seen bad letters of recommendation. One person who eventually matched with me, he confided and said, I'm really glad I matched here. I had a lot of issues in the interviewing process because I wasn't getting a lot of interviews and I couldn't understand why. And nobody told him, but I think our program director eventually told him that the person who wrote him a letter of recommendation actually talked mostly about his ability to make balloon animals and just talked about how he was great with the kids for the balloon animal. And actually didn't talk about any of his clinical skills. And a lot of people just passed him up. But luckily, our program was like, well, otherwise, the application looks great. This is kind of funny. We want to see this person, see who's this balloon animal guy. For them to write you a letter of recommendation, it's not enough for them to just have seen you round a couple of times. This is how you make them write you. This is how you get the parts for knows you. Because even if they've seen you, whether they've seen you round once or 8 times, this is how you do it. After they agree to it, then you say, okay, that's awesome. And you can do this one of two ways. Say, can we set up some time to talk more about my aspirations in this specialty? And then you just set up a 30-minute thing with them. And then this is again what I was saying. You control the narrative. Now you can tell the person what you want in your personal statement by just saying, this is why I want to go into pediatrics. These are my skills. You also give them your CV and your personal statement. So even if they can't meet with you, which is the other way you could do it, you at least send them your CV and hopefully your personal statement if you have it done. That way they'll know what to put in there for you. If they've already agreed to it, but not if it's just, oh, I don't know if I could do it, man. It's important that when you ask them to, it's best, if possible, that you do it in person. Because if you do it via an email, you won't be able to check their body language to see if they're writing this for you reluctantly or not. So if they look like they're good and then they say, but I'm really busy, do you think you can draft me one? It's important that you try to do it as soon as possible because sometimes letter writers can take a while to review and set up an account to submit it for you. So get that done. There are templates out there of what should be included in a letter of recommendation if you've never done that before. And then you can also reach out to people in the ANPA Education Committee or me if you need help with what should be in one of those things. Bonus points. So these are bonus points. I've actually had a program where they actually had a column for bonus points. These are that certain je ne sais quoi that you can't specifically ask about a person because it's just like an open text box for tell me what's interesting. And that's what they want to know. What makes you unique? What makes you memorable? And people can usually get this from a couple of different places. It could be your personal statement, the experience section, the impactful experience, the interviews, your hobbies. So the one thing you need to remember is you're going to be a resident. The reason they call you a resident or a house officer is because you literally live and reside in the hospital. For most of you, you'll be spending more time in the hospital than you do in your actual homes with your actual family, which means your co-residents are not necessarily your co-workers. They're your roommate. So they want to see, do I actually want to spend time with this person? It's one thing to be smart and skilled, but are you also interesting? So, as an example, just for me, when I was an interviewer, I would give people bonus points. I wouldn't tell them if they spoke different languages because I grew up in New York and I know the importance of speaking different languages and being able to establish rapport with different cultures. And, I really like dance. So, anybody that had dancing as a hobby, I would give them bonus points. So, if you like singing, you play an instrument, put that on there. It may not apply to every program, but it could apply to your interviewer, somebody reading it, and be like, "Whoa, this person likes to sing. We have a choir here. Maybe they can join. We're in the need of a new tenor or a soprano." So don't lose that point. A lot of times I see people are scared, honestly, of the hobbies and just like, let me play it safe. I like to spend time with my family and read books. Yeah. I mean, I think honestly anything is up for game as long as it's appropriate. I mean, like if you're doing more adult type of dancing on the weekends. You don't want to put that there. But if you like anime, if you speak a different language, if you have a hobby, a skill, put it down. You could get those bonus points. And sometimes that could be the difference between getting an interview or not. I made my personal statement when I applied to medical school about dancing. And I talked about how dancing and performing is like being a physician, and that you train a long time to learn the dance, do the dance, and sometimes you slip up, but you have to get back up because you have your team with you dancing and you have to do it for the crowd. So you have to keep going. Then at the end, you get a round of applause from everybody. And you realize it was all worth it because you made their day better. The same way a doctor does all that training through all the trials and tribulations because they make their patients better. And I used that theme, and I basically got all my interviews because of that. So don't hide your unique skills. Interview day. I won't go over this too much because we'll probably have a separate webinar talking about how to be competitive for the interview. But the things that I'll say, if you guys don't happen to come back for that, be nice and courteous with everybody from the program director to the person to the coordinator who's doing the scheduling, to if you're there personally, to the guy cleaning the floor. Act as if everybody's interviewing you, because what you don't know is that the program director is very, very, very busy. And their lifeblood is basically the coordinators and their admin. If you treat them poorly, all the admin has to do is say, I'm not getting a good vibe from this person. I don't think I'd like them if they were here. They don't even have to explain it too much more than that. And then they'll just drop your application. And I've seen it happen a number of times. You know, everything from this person was kind of rude. This person called and they talk like this. This person was very curt and unpolite in the emails. This person was on the interview and asked too many questions and didn't let anybody else ask questions during the tour. And they just dropped them. Interview day, Murphy's Law. Set multiple alarms, prep your clothes, go by the location if it's there, be early. Anything, Murphy's Law, anything that can happen will happen. So act and prepare as if that will happen. If it's virtual, make sure that you have the good internet. If you have a very old computer that tends to crash or overheat, this is the time to get a new one, or at least borrow somebody else's. This is the time to spend money on a nanny if the kids tend to bust into your room. Interview days, we'll go over more of this when we have that workshop. But the things that they're going to be assessing you for are those bonus points kind of things that you kind of get through just body language that can't always be communicated on paper, like your interpersonal communication skills. Some people are really good at saying things on paper, but you talk to them and they're super awkward and they can't get the words out. Organizational fit, leadership. Do you seem like you'd be somebody that would fit in with how the other people at the program are? Problem solving, personal insight, they'll usually ask questions like, tell me about a difficult situation and how you got out of it. And they want to see if you're able to see what your deficits are and address it. And professionalism and that overall impression. And they will score you on this kind of scoring system from unacceptable to concerns, everything from unacceptable, would rather not fill our spots and have this person, to an exceptional candidate who will be a star in the program. Addressing blemishes, nobody's perfect, and most people have things in their past that may be potential red flags. Some of the most common ones include failing a course, failing a class, failing standardized exam, gap years. So basically anything that, if you are not a US grad that passed all their classes, it's likely that you may want to address it someplace. The places to address it are either the personal statement or the impactful experience. The preference is impactful experience. And this is something that wasn't always there. Before, people had to put it in their personal statement, and then had to then walk that fine line between, should I make a whole paragraph of this sob story or just 2 lines and maybe I didn't say enough? Use the impactful experience, address the blemish there, or they will assume the worst. We talked about this earlier. And if you put it in your impactful experience, you really don't need to put it in your personal statement unless you want to, again, highlight your resilience. How do you address a blemish? you objectively give an account of what happened. You don't want to throw shade at anybody and say, oh, I didn't pass this class because my teacher hated me and he's always done this. He's never liked me. You want to show that you can accept accountability. Remember, that goes back to the professionalism and being able to recognize your things that you could improve on. What did you learn from the blemish? Did you understand your weakness? Did you grow from it? And what insight did you take from it post blemish? You're working on the issue, you progressed, you passed the test, and now you have more passion, resolve, perseverance. So a lot of times you can actually sometimes take your red flags and actually turn them into a really positive green flag by showing how you grew from it. And how does that actually look like? This is one that I made up from all the mentors I've had over the years. Common issues were gap years and unpassed exams. So the impactful experience, I also use it as an opportunity to add more context. And I say that because some things you guys don't know is that when you do the experiences, it's not going to always be in chronologic order, because what they're going to do is you have 10 experiences and maybe you put them in chronologic order, but they're going to take the three experiences that have the most meaningful, and they're going to, when it's read on the other side, they're going to start with those experiences, and then they're going to do the rest, which is a different order. So especially if you have a bit of a not straightforward journey, it could be confusing, especially if you don't say, oh, this is the equivalent of residency in Nigeria. This is when I did this. And you just can't put it all. And if I'm a program director or an evaluator on the selection committee, if I have to flip back and forth multiple times, if I don't understand your story, I'm going to get frustrated, and I'm low key going to have subconsciously negative thoughts about how much grace I'm going to give you. So that's why, again, it's very important that you are clear and organized and provide the appropriate context. So don't assume everybody's going to understand your story well. So you should have even somebody who doesn't know you actually go through your application, because people who do know you be like, well, yeah, I know they came to this country, so it makes sense, blah, blah, blah. So you can also use your personal statement to outline your story, so they have it in a nice chronological, organized manner. But you have a limited number of characters to put your impactful experience. So here's one I made up. After graduating in 2017, I completed 4 years of broad clinical training and 2 years as a general practitioner in Nigeria. See, this right here addresses the gap year. If I'm looking at your application, I'm going to see your year of graduation, and then I'm going to see, oh, it's been 10 years, and then I'm going to see a bunch of experiences, but I'm not going to completely understand where it all fits in. But over here, I just address the gap year. These, 2017, that's 8 years. In 6 years, you're working as a physician. You already did train. After relocating to the US in 2023 for family reasons or whatever reason is germane to you, I balanced adjustment in the new country, research, and now you're also saying what you did since you've been here, and volunteering while coping with personal loss. This period extended my USMLE timeline and led to second attempts. See, if you had a multiple attempt, you can address it. You can even say directly, what were the different reasons? Maybe you can separate research and volunteering in a different part, or you could say the family adjusting to a new place and coping with the personal loss led you more directly to why you had second attempts at the exam. It's not because you weren't smart enough, just that you were in a new country and somebody in your family just died. But it strengthened my resilience, discipline, and focus. These challenges deepened my commitment to medicine and reinforced the perseverance and adaptability I would bring to residency. You see, now you just took your red flags and you just told and brought them to the strengths. You've been training, you got that free throw shot for being a doctor already. And now you took the USMLE, you got it, and now you show that you have resilience, discipline, and focus. You're able to do that while balancing all these other things. So we're wrapping up now. Key takeaways you want to submit in September, ideally within a week or two of that September 25th date. Be strategic with the signaling and the demographic. Take your personal statement and experiences seriously. It's an easy way to get ruled out if there's bad grammar, spell check, organization. It's the easiest way to get ruled out. I remember, don't feel, to a certain extent, You can't go over it too many times. I mean, if you're losing sleep, it's another thing. But I mean, I went over mine 2 dozen times, but you want to at least make sure that you don't get ruled out because you spelled a word wrong or you use a colon in the wrong place or your formatting wasn't consistent. You need to sell yourself. You are your primary advocate. This is not the time to be humble. There is a line, yes, between being cocky and humble, but you need to be more on the side of the cocky. Cocky in that you also have insight and know that you're not perfect, but you need to sell yourself. If you do not say what you did, they will not know. Do not assume, oh, Fred is in Nigeria and everybody does source and does all these specialties for this many years. I mean, everybody knows that. They do not know that. They do not know how big your patient population was. They don't know it was resource low. You need to tell them, do not take it for granted. These are easy points. I'm saying it like this because I've seen it so many times. Do not miss those 3 points. And they're not just little one pointers, they're almost 2 and 3 pointers. You've been a doctor for a very long time. That really shows your qualification. And then explain your gaps and blemishes. Here are some of the resources I use. You can go on ERAS and USMLE and all. They even have videos that kind of go over how to walk you through the application process.